I'm Barbara Tom, and I'm going to be your moderator today. And I was in the past life a public health nurse, but I now direct a immigrant migrant center in Waipahu, and we are very big on language access. We developed two committees from the community, a Marshallese and a Chukis steering committee, which guides all of our services that we do in the Waipahu Safe Haven Immigrant Migrant Center. And I don't see our interpreters here, but I just wanted to know how many of you are interpreters. Can you raise your hand? Oh, okay. And how many of you are wannabe interpreters? Raise your hand. Oh, great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. You know, the interpreters have an extremely important role in this community. And I cannot tell you enough how important that role is. We have been advocating during the pandemic, and now for Maui, a big cohort of together are trying to create language access for the community in Maui. So I thank you for your services if you're interpreters, if you're bosses or coordinators or people that want to learn about language access, please join us in this effort to improve language access for the state of Hawaii. Okay, we're going to introduce our three speakers. And after the introduction, and they all said, oh, don't read our bios, it's too long. And it is very long, so I'm just going to introduce them. They can introduce themselves. Then we're going to pose 5 questions to them, and each of them will answer the question. And at the end, I ask you if you have any questions for our speakers, please write it on the card. We'll be collecting the cards, and if time permits, we're going to entertain those questions from our speakers. Okay? So, the first speaker is Christopher Demick. Christopher?
Aloha, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I have felt the spirit of aloha. I am a transplant from the mainland, and I'm a Tier 6 Spanish court interpreter here in Hawaii, but I'm also certified in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Maryland. I also am a nationally certified Spanish medical interpreter, and I've trained medical interpreters since 2001. And so it's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you, Christopher. Our second speaker is Cristina Arzuaga.
Hello, everyone. Cristina Arzuaga. I am originally from Puerto Rico and born and raised there, and came to the mainland to go to college. And I guess when they ask us about our journey, I'll tell you a little bit about my journey. But basically, I'm a federally certified interpreter. I lived in New York City for 26 years, where I worked for DOJ, the federal courts. I worked for the UN. I did some State Department stuff. I did a lot of TV stuff, like debates, like political debates, live on TV. A lot of interesting stuff in New York. And then my husband got a wonderful job here 8 years ago at UH, and that's why I'm here now, and it's been great. Beautiful 8 years.
Thank you, Christina. And our third speaker needs no introduction, is Dr. Sue, and I'm told it's Sue Zhang. Did I pronounce it right, Sue?
Zhang.
Zhang. Okay, well, I've been calling her Sue Zhang all this time, but yeah, go ahead, Sue.
Hi, I'm Sue Zhang, and I actually retired from the University of Hawaii. Her husband was my boss a long time ago, where I ended up teaching, I started off teaching Chinese, and then I ended up teaching interpreting and translating skills. I was a director for the Center for Interpretation and Translation Studies, but I retired. I went full-time into interpreting, and I'll also talk a little bit about my background in interpreting. So I just suffice to say that now I'm at KCC helping over there, as well as with a company you might have heard, Language Services Hawaii. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sue. And I worked with Sue back when we were developing COFA interpreters for the state of Hawaii. We got a grant from the School of Medicine, and she trained 15 of our interpreters, and all of them are on the ground today. So thanks, Sue. Okay, our first question is, could you share your personal journey of leveraging your multilingual skills to enter and succeed in your respective fields? And I'll start with Christopher.
Okay. Well, I began working in the fields in cherry and apple orchards next to farm workers, and that's how I learned my language skills originally, Spanish, and loved it so much that I took it in school and majored in college in Spanish translation and interpretation, and liked it so much that I decided to make a career out of it. And we created MD Translation and doing training and interpreter services. I think probably as a medical interpreter, that's what I'm supposed to focus on. I felt in the beginning maybe like I was not up to speed on medical terminology, and so I did a lot of studying and self-study, and now with so much online on the internet, I call them pandemic perks. There's so many resources available. For example, there are free medical terminology courses from Des Moines University, and so it's really easy to invest in your career as an interpreter. And I would say the biggest investment to become an interpreter is time, because it takes time first to learn the interpretation skills, and then to learn the terminology that applies to each field that you interpret for. So if it's medical, then you need to specialize in family medicine or cardiology, and learn that terminology so that it rolls off your tongue when you go to interpret. And one thing I say in my interpreter trainings is that even though I'm getting old, I really feel like my memory is improving, and so I feel like I'm winning the race against time. And so that's one thing that I would sell to all of you for interpretation, is to improve your memory and to improve your mental capabilities. And also there are lots of studies out there about how bilingual people have less potential of developing Alzheimer's and dementia and things like that. And so overall, I think as interpreters, we can be healthier brain-wise. And so all of those maybe are my journey as a medical interpreter.
Thanks, Chris. Go ahead.
Well, I'm here to focus more on legal interpreting, but to tell you a little bit about my journey and how I ended up doing this. As I told you guys, I grew up in Puerto Rico, so I was in a very privileged position as it was. Puerto Rico is very bilingual, and you can get a perfectly bilingual education going to school there, which I did. And so because English is so prevalent there too, it's very equal, you know. And now it's even better, because when I was growing up, we didn't have cable TV or anything like that. I'm that old. So I was watching everything like Starsky and Hutch dubbed into Spanish and things like that. But nowadays, kids get to listen to everything in English. So it's a great place to become bilingual. But I never expected to become an interpreter, ever. I went to school, I went to Oberlin for music, and I had always wanted to do music, and I wanted to become an opera singer. So I did that at Oberlin. I did a degree in the college because my dad's like, you got to have a college degree, please, besides a music degree. But of course, I did French. I didn't do anything, useful really in my dad's point of view, which is completely untrue. But that was his perspective. And after school, I got a scholarship. I went to Milan, Italy, and I spent some time in Milan. Junior year, I had spent some time in France, honing my French too. And so by the time I got out, I had, not only my Spanish, but I had a pretty good command of French and Italian, which I was using for music. I did that. I had a career in opera for a while, till like my late 30s. At that time, there was just some changes in my life that I decided I needed less itinerant and more secure career, but at the same time, something that was a little bit flexible because I'm not an office type of person. I had always been kind of an artist. So I dabbled. I thought, well, let me try TV, radio. I did Spanish radio in New York for a while, and then I didn't like that. And I was like, I should try interpreting. So I started by doing depositions little by little and kind of getting my feet wet. And I loved it. I was hooked. So I was like, okay, I knew enough to know that, yes, I speak Spanish, but that doesn't make me an interpreter, which we could talk about later. So I knew I had to go and study. So I applied to Monterey Institute. And before that, I was like, okay, I have the summer to do something. I had given up my apartment. So I went to Arizona, where they had the federal certification program there. And I went and did that. And my professors there said, you're pretty advanced, you're pretty good. You have a good chance of being able to pass this federal exam on the first try, and you can save yourself a whole lot of money in Monterey. And so I followed their advice, and I did. And so that's how I became a federal interpreter. But it was a journey that I never expected. So part of this talk, there are many ways that you can parlay your languages into different careers, and that was my journey.
Thank you. Sue?
Yeah, a lot of talented interpreters also have other hidden talents like music or art or something. It's really surprising. I know so many that are pianists and things. I happen to be a music minor because I'm not good enough in majoring in music. But yeah, drummer, not an opera singer. Okay, which didn't do me any good. But anyway, yeah. As for me, again, I just went abroad after college and said, oh, I guess I'm going to need Chinese because I'm going to live in a Chinese-speaking place, and so I had to learn the language. That was the only reason I studied. But then I fell in love with the language and the people, and I just ended up coming back after many years and saying, okay, I need another degree because I don't know anything. The older you get, you realize you don't know much. So that was me. I said, okay, I'm never going to go back to school after after I graduated from undergrad college. I said, I can't stand school. Anyway, I came back, and little did I know, I ended up getting my PhD here at the University of Hawaii. And but they happened to open the program at the Center for Interpretation and Translation Studies, and we had a United Nations interpreter come over and train in conference interpreting. So my background was trained in conference interpreting. So as I went through that program, it was so hard. I'd sit there and cry during this. I would just hide my head and just cry. It was so hard. And I said, okay, I'm not going down the interpreting path. I'm going to go some other path. And when I graduated, I got a call saying, hey, do you want to interpret for this deposition? And I said, oh, sure, hold on. What's a deposition? I had to look it up. I had no idea what it was. Some of you may not know, but it was, and then found out that it paid very well. And I'm like, it paid? Oh, you mean you can get paid for interpreting? oh, well, maybe I'll do this. But I don't, I need a lot of information. I have to prepare. So I think that was the smartest thing that I've learned is preparation. And I think all of us talk about that. We realize what we don't know. So I ended up preparing for that. The first day was hell. And then after that, it got easier. And then the money came, 2,000 in a week. I'm like, oh, this is nice. And then I realized you can get paid. And so I just kept going. And I just kept going. And then I started doing conferences and things like that. And then I eventually got into, I started teaching at the university. I had a very lucky friends and I ended up teaching at UH at the Center for Interpretation and Translation Studies. And that's when the courts notified us that, they said, hey, we need help. Our interpreters here, this is back in the 90s. Some of you may not have been born, but they said, our interpreters really need some help. And so we started looking into what's happening in the community. And I realized, wow, there's a lot of limited English people in the community that need good interpreters in the courts, in the medical field, and that's kind of what started my career, is more in the teaching of it. And because I had to train interpreters in community interpreting, I had to start doing community interpreting. So that's how I fell into this, and then, of course, joined the Supreme Court Committee at that time of court interpreters to just discuss how are we going to improve the quality of the interpreters here in the courtroom. And then after that, it went into the medical field, and then all across the nation, I was more on the teaching side, finding out, we need to come up with curriculum in order to teach people how to be good interpreters, and then all the ethics behind it and everything. So it's been a journey for me, and that's kind of how I started. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is, what are the requirements, key qualities, or skills and pathways to succeed in your respective field?
Well, I would say for medical interpreters, I would say for any of our fields, whether it's medical or legal or community or conference interpreters, to be able to prepare yourself and succeed, I think you need to have a plan. And so part of that plan first starts with training. And so in my mind, like I said before, there are two types of training. First, interpretation skills. So simultaneous interpretation, which is what is used in court and conference a lot, and consecutive interpretation, which is with pauses, which is most commonly used in interpretation and in court on the witness stand, and in community interpreting quite a bit. And so with the use of pauses, we have to have lots of different skills to be able to leverage our memory, to be able to control our memory and not have our memory control us. And so note-taking is part of them, part of those skills. And then, so have a plan and prepare yourself, so get training, mostly on memory techniques for consecutive interpretation. So that would be the first part of the training. The second part of the training, terminology. So basic medical terminology, like I said, if you're going to interpret in cardiology, you need to know everything there is to know about the heart, about the circulatory system, everything like that. And then I would say the next step would be credentialing. So there are two national certification bodies. One's the National Board for Certification of Medical Interpreters, and they have several languages that they certify, a handful, I would say, not several. And then, but then they have qualification, or what they call hub. And so they test your English skills and they test your skills of the code of ethics for medical interpreters. And so that's one of the certification bodies. The other one is called CCHI, and they have 3 languages that they certify, and I believe they're Arabic, Mandarin, and Spanish. And then they have what they call core, which is the same thing as the other body. That basically they test your medical terminology, they test your ethics, and they test your English language knowledge. And then they give you a qualification to interpret. And so I would say that credentialing is important, although with both of those bodies, it's pretty expensive. So for the hub or for the core, it's about $250. So again, preparation, you want to prepare yourself as much as you can so that you only have to pay once and take the test once and ace it. And so then once you have prepared yourself with interpretation skills, with terminology, and with a credential, then you can go out, and the next step in your plan would be to promote yourself. And so I would say, as a new interpreter, probably the most important thing is to get experience. And so right out of college, with my interpretation degree, I started with one of those telephonic interpretation companies, and they were kind of slave drivers, but I learned a lot. I learned a lot about note-taking. I didn't have any visuals, so it's all over the phone with a headset, and so I learned a lot about note-taking and memory skills, and that really helped me. Would I want that job now? Probably not, because I was kind of tied to the phone. Now there's also video remote interpreting through Zoom, through many different platforms, but getting that key experience to be able to then take yourself and promote yourself to clinics and to hospitals and other places that I'll talk about later. But I would say have a plan. So first, acquire those skills, interpretation skills and terminology, get a credential and to give yourself something to stand on, to show that, to prove that not just to take your word for it, that you're bilingual and that you know how to interpret, and then also look at getting experience and then promoting yourself.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
So obviously, a lot of this is crossover, right? The prep and everything. So I'm going to try not to repeat the parts that are common to all types of interpretation. I would say that for legal interpreting, one of the things that you have to be cognizant about and learn, aside from, again, vocabulary and skills and all that, is you have to actually learn about the legal system itself. You can't interpret what you don't understand, right? So if you don't understand what a legal term means, there's just no way you can interpret it, let alone, when you're dealing with, in the case of Spanish, there are 20 countries in which Spanish is spoken as a first language, right? So, and every single country has their own legal system. Many things don't translate exactly because they don't have a legal system like ours. So you have to understand not only our legal system, but you have to have done your homework and understand the legal system for wherever you're interpreting, whether it be Mexico, Colombia, Ecuador, España, Spain, right? I particularly, two instances in my career that I remember being extremely nervous. I was with the head of justice in Spain, and the U.S. was negotiating an extradition. You might have heard about this guy, Victor Bout. He's a famous arms dealer. He was one of the guys that Putin wanted for the basketball player. What was the woman's name? Brittany, right, Griner. So that it was a case involving that. So it was some tense negotiations, and there were, Spain has its own special extradition. These are like high-level treaty terminology and whatever. I was just sweating bullets, because one thing is to interpret here in the United States where you are kind of bringing everything back to this system, and you're using words that that are common to this system, but when you're abroad and you're dealing with their system and how everything, and then you have to find the equivalencies in our system, it's a lot harder, so I would say that's something that you have to really, really always prepare for in legal. As far as generalities for any interpreter, you have to be very disciplined. I mean, I do a lot of legal translation, not only interpretation, and I have it down to like how many words do I have to complete every single day to have this on time, Same thing when I'm doing transcripts, and I've never missed a deadline, thank God, up to now. But you just have to be extremely disciplined. Fearless, too, about research. I don't know how many times I have cold called, I don't know, some department in Ecuador and say, in fact, I did once because I was doing a case about the poisoning of the aquifers for the indigenous people there, and it's a case against Chevron, which had been Texaco, and there were some things that I just didn't know and couldn't find, and I needed to understand this to translate. So here I am making cold calls to Ecuador until I found the right person to speak to. So again, research, study, prepare, be fearless in trying to make sure you're doing the best job you can possible. As far as credentials for federal, I can talk about the federal certification. It's a 2-year process. You take an oral exam later. First, you take a written exam, which is like a graduate level, like a GRE level exam, Spanish and English. And if you pass that, then you are able to take the practical, the oral exam, which you'll do simultaneous, consecutive, and sight translation because you're using them all in interpreting and legal interpreting. It's a really tough exam. It's tougher than the bar. I think there's like between a 4 to 6% passing rate. So once, right now it's only Spanish, Navajo, and Haitian Creole, but they're hoping to expand that.
Thank you. Sue?
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I wish they had more languages, and I think that's a big problem. I agree with everything, and so there's really not much left for me to talk about except one thing. But I did want to explain that that research is very important, and no matter what I think all of us are saying that, if you don't understand what it is you're interpreting, then you're going to walk in just, I speak the language, and then just fall on your face. We don't want that to happen. So research, every time I take a job, I don't care what it is, I'm always preparing. Even if it's just a medical job on the knee, how does the knee, what are the terms for the knee? Or just renewing my mind about the knee versus the cardiology versus somewhere else. But it's always very important to prepare, because if you walk in unprepared, it's very embarrassing. Not only that, you're really hurting the person that you're interpreting for. So preparation is important, and then the research that goes along with that preparation is very important. And sometimes the research could take years, like she was talking about. Sometimes it could just take, an hour of your time before you go. But please don't go anywhere without preparing. And when you're preparing, you end up usually with a glossary. So that glossary is something that I have on my phone. I have something where I can just pull it up, and I have pictures, and and it grows and expands. Like in the medical field, there's so much glossary. When it comes to conferences, I just kind of put my glossary on a shelf and never look at it again. But when it comes to the medical or the court, there's even if you're walking into court, you need to know, is this an arraignment? Then let's find out what the law says. Is it talking about how many milliliters of alcohol is in your blood system at a breathalyzer? And you have to know all of these terms. So it's best to just have it and keep growing as your career grows. The other thing is, I wanted to point out that credentialing is a problem with a lot of our languages here because they don't have the languages. But just to let you know that we did develop, thanks to Barb, we developed a medical interpreting test in Chuukese and in Marshallese. And now we're in the middle of developing the Japanese as well as the Korean. And those are for the classes that I'm teaching through KCC, the community interpreting class in medical interpreting. And that is not for this one, but for the next, I think after this, the conference, the one who helped support that program is going to be speaking right after this workshop. The other thing is, I think we need to get business skills, and business skills is where a lot of people fail. If you want to work through an agency, it's easier. They do all the invoicing and they pay you on time, but you still have to do your part of turning in what you need to turn in, your time stamps or whatever it is you need to turn in, your parking, receipts and things. But if you can't be organized enough to turn in what you need to turn in, you're not going to get paid, or you're not going to get paid on time. The other thing, if you really want to promote yourself, then you need to, think about what you dress, how you dress. But you're important, you have to pay taxes too. If you're, most interpreters, translators are independent contractors, which means you own your own business. You can't go down to the, when COVID hit, some people were going to the unemployment agency saying, oh, I'm an employee of such and such an agency. Well, no, you're not. You're not an employee of the courts. It's just that the courts don't use you because it's been closed for a while, for example, but you're your own employee. So in other words, you're self-employed. And in order to know even how to say that to people, you have to understand what that means to you. Do you have business cards? Do you have a website? Maybe you want to develop a website, maybe to get more jobs, especially in the rarer languages. How do you push yourself? Do you send out your resumes to people? Do you even have a resume? So how you really promote yourself is extremely important when it comes to an interpreter and translator, just because you're independent contractor. So business skills, how do you pay taxes? What kind of taxes are you supposed to pay? I think that is also something that's very important. So thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Okay, our next question for the panelists is, can you provide examples of challenges you've encountered while navigating these industries with your linguistic or language skills, and how did you overcome them?
Well, I think it depends on the language, but it seems like everybody knows a few words in Spanish and they really want to practice them with patience. And so that can be challenging because as interpreters, we're all about accuracy. And so I guess that's a challenge. From a business perspective, I think, and I don't know how big an issue this is, but agencies and healthcare organizations using unqualified interpreters or paying bargain basement rates. And I think the way to overcome that, like I said before, get your experience, know your worth, and then market yourself. So one way that I overcame that is I decided I'm not going to work with this agency if they're going to pay me by the minute instead of by the hour or so many hours minimum, because as freelancers, we block time out of our schedule, and if there's if it gets canceled, or if the patient doesn't show and we're only there 10 minutes, then we only get paid for 10 minutes. And so that can be difficult when you're trying to pay the bills and pay the taxes and everything like that. So know where to market yourself. One place that I found was helpful was insurance companies, like workers' comp cases, accidents, and then I also already mentioned telephonic interpretation and VRI, or video remote interpreting. So those would be the challenges that I've seen and ways to overcome them.
So I think one of the biggest challenges in general for interpreters, more than translators, I would say, is a lack of understanding by the general public of what we do. And you would think that by now people would have understood, especially in the courts where we're used all the time. But it's not understood. And there are reasons for that. Part of it is, a lack of uniformity when it comes to quality, and people who are prepared and less prepared to be working. So part of it is just a lack of standardization in our profession that leads to some misunderstanding. But, people tend to think, oh, you speak Spanish, you can interpret. This person, they don't take you seriously as a professional because they think, so what? My grandma spoke Japanese and, she can do it. But as I said to you guys before, even though I grew up perfectly bilingual, in fact, I'm a rare case in that my English and my Spanish are equal, right? Two A languages, which is not very common. Even then, I knew what I didn't know. And I knew enough to know I'm no interpreter. I don't have the skills, I don't have the knowledge, I don't have the vocabulary. So I think that's one thing. So we have to constantly, in nice ways, in polite ways, explain to people we work with, would you say, right? That what our position is, what we can do, what we can't do as interpreters, so that people understand what the limits are and how to treat us professionally. But of course, like Sue said, part of it is how we present ourselves. If you don't present yourself as a professional, you're not going to be treated as a professional. So I would say that's one thing. Personally, honestly, I've encountered sexism in the profession. I hate to say it, but I have. I have worked, as you can see, I've worked with many of the three-letter agencies in the past, and there's a lot of machismo going on. And there are a lot of people who think they know more than you, and they do about certain things, but they don't know more than me about other things, you know? And so you have to stand your ground. I think learn how to do that. That's been a challenge. In the beginning, I would get intimidated by certain people and kind of back off. But you know, I've learned to when I'm certain about something or when I know I'm right, just state the interpreter stands by the interpreter's interpretation, and that's it. You don't fight. You don't. You know. You just kind of say it politely and move on. And also be confident enough to, like, you know, accept when you've made a mistake. I think that is a challenge for people starting out too. They don't want to seem like they don't know anything or get into trouble, but part of being a good interpreter is knowing when you make a mistake and being able to correct it and correct yourself.
Thank you. I got to ask her later what a three-letter agency is. I don't know, but I wrote it down. And I think that's what interpreters tend to do, is when you hear something you don't understand, you write it down. So I know in my field, I think one of the question is, can you provide examples of challenges that you've encountered when navigating these industries with, I don't even understand the question, but I think one of the, personally, it's just vocabulary. I just don't know the vocabulary. You know, Chinese is my second language, not my first language. I am not pure bilingual. It's very rare to find somebody who is. And so for me, it's the second language. It's my Chinese who I've really had a tough time with. But yet when I meet people whose language abilities are amazing, I really want to encourage them. You could do better than I can. Let's get you to the point where you could even take over. I don't need this. I mean, we're all colleagues. So we are not really, I mean, sometimes you could say we're in competition with each other, but to really, you know, I think in this industry, we all need to help one another. So that's one thing, is I think the vocabulary is a big deal for me that I keep running into, and just so I've studied hard. Another one is what I've been frustrated is the lack of understanding how a good interpreter, what a good interpreter can really do. And I agree with them by them saying, oh, somebody can speak Spanish, this nurse or this somebody can, you know, this worker is good enough, when actually, no, it's not. And when you hear or even people who call themselves interpreters who've never been trained. And you see them advocating or going way beyond what an interpreter's role should be, getting way involved with somebody when they should be keeping neutral, for example. So breaking the code of ethics is something that really bothers me. Another thing is the reason that I actually helped start the Language Services Hawaii is because of the lack of professional interpreters in the industry. I've tried so hard to try to teach long-term interpreters how to get better, or encourage them to take classes, and they're like, I've been doing this for a long time, I don't need training. And I'm like, you do. And so, you know, eventually I just said, okay, we just need somebody who understands what the industry is. And that's, just to be honest with you, that's one reason that we started that. And so I really think that professionalism in this industry is of utmost importance, and quality is very important. honesty and ethics. And so to me, I think in the industry, I'm just really striving hard. One time I called somebody in this room, I said, hey, what are you doing? She says, oh, I'm studying the difference between leukemia and lymphoma. And I'm like, and do you understand? She says, yes, it's very difficult. But now I understand, and I'm making a vocabulary list. I'm like, why? Because yesterday we had something on lymphoma, and I didn't know the difference. And so that's the kind of people that you want to be. You want to go home and open up your computer and say, wow, I didn't even know the difference. I knew how to say the term, but I don't really understand the difference. So anyway, that's just, there's so much to this industry that, you know, we're really doing a great job, I think. And everyone who's done so much work, you know, from Trina to Pacific Gateway to Barbara to even this language access conference, all the language access, everyone has been pushing, especially in the judiciary, has been pushing for quality interpreters and translators. And I'm really glad that all of you are in this room, because just to see how far we've come in this industry is so encouraging, and it's exciting. Now I can retire. Yeah.
No, you can't, Sue. Okay, our next question. Put my glasses on. Could you share a notable experience where your language skills had a meaningful impact on a patient, client, or a community?
So the one that I thought of was way back at the beginning of my career when I was working as a telephonic interpreter, right out of college, and a young family. And so I'd been through my own children's birth, so I'd witnessed that. But one day I got a phone call to help interpret for a woman who was in labor and delivery with her 13th child. And it's good when you go to interpret that they give you some background, and they said she has no muscle structure left to push, but the doctor doesn't want to do a cesarean. And so we're going to be repeating a lot to have her push when the time comes. And I'm like, okay, I can do that. And so I actually interpreted for a delivery of a 13th child over the phone and I don't even remember what hospital she was in, but it was a great experience for me. And then I've had lots of other opportunities outside of medical in my career. And one was in New York City after 9/11, an event called Listening to the City. And let's see. Oh, one that was particularly interesting was interpreting, again over the phone, but it wasn't through a telephonic agency. It was interpreting from an indigenous language in Mexico for a patient here, and they could only find an interpreter over the phone in southern Mexico. So I was interpreting from English to Spanish, and that interpreter was interpreting from the indigenous from Spanish to the indigenous language to the patient who was in person. So it was really interesting. That we call that relay interpretation when it's between several different languages, and also with Spanish Sign Language. So I'm just happy to be an interpreter because there's so many experiences. They're sad experiences, but there are so many experiences where you say, wow, I don't know when I would feel so fulfilled in a career. And people always say, wow, you're getting really old. When are you going to retire like Sue? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know that I ever want to retire because I love what I do so much. And like I said, using my brain and being able to help other people.
So in legal interpretation, I feel like every day is a day where I have a notable experience where I kind of feel like I've helped somebody. By definition, if you're in the legal system, it's not because you want to be in it, right? You're usually in trouble of some sort. So, you know, it's scary to be in a country where you don't speak the language, you don't understand the legal system, and find yourself in trouble. And the interpreter is your conduit to understanding and to getting a fair shake, right, in the system. And so I really do feel like every day I'm helping, whether I'm doing it here at Alakea or in circuit court or family court. It's one of the things that I love the most about my job is that I feel like I'm making a difference. And of course, by making a difference, I'm not saying I'm advocating because that's not my role. I'm just saying I let them know exactly what's going on and they are getting the same experience as a non-LEP is getting, hopefully, right, if I'm doing my job correctly. A notable experience is a while back, we had, when I was still in New York, there was a huge case that was a huge sex and human trafficking case. And I was there to interpret for the victims, which were dozens of them, young girls, scared as hell. And it just, I felt that me being a woman and also kind of knowing what tone to take, and of course, I'm interpreting, right? So obviously if the person asking the question is being harsh, I have to convey that. But the person who was the victim's advocate, or like the person taking care of them, was very gentle, and I felt like I could convey that to them and make them feel comfortable and make them feel like they could testify in court and they would have no repercussions. And they could be brave and make a difference. So I thought that was one of the big cases for me.
Thank you.
Yeah, sometimes you're interpreting and you just kind of wipe your tear and just keep going. Yeah, because we get affected. Actually, we get affected a lot. Yeah, this talks about a notable experience. And I think that what's interesting is that there are two things. One is that I love when you see communication happening and they forget that there's an interpreter. And so you're really helping them have face-to-face, one-to-one communication without even realizing that an interpreter's in the room, like if it's, a one-on-one kind of thing. And I think that's kind of cool. Also in the courtroom, right, when you're interpreting so quickly and they just hear the voiceover, but yet they can really express themselves, like these victims can express themselves in their own language with as much emphasis and emotion that they want to, because they know that it's going to be accurately conveyed and interpreted. And so that's always rewarding. I think one of the biggest rewarding things for me is that when I walked into Home Depot, and I wanted to, I just walked, at Home Depot you walk by, and to the right is the returns, the customer service. So I was waiting for my sister or somebody, and I was watching the guy saying, sir, you got to, could you bring that over here? And it looked like there were 2 ACs, air conditionings he was returning, 2 boxes. And so the guy was saying, well, bring the second box because maybe you get more money. Just if you bring it over here, I have to, see how much it is. And the guy was just not responding. He just kind of looked at him and just kind of looked down. And he goes, look, sir, if you want this, and he started getting frustrated. If you want to get your money back, if you want money, fine. It's up to you. And I realized, okay, I walked over to the Chinese guy. And I said, I think he wants you to bring the box there so he can scan it to see how much money he has to return to you. He goes, oh, thank you so much. Of course, the Chinese, and he started bringing the box over. And then the guy who was behind the counter said, oh, thank you. Of course, they're thanking me. And his frustration and his misunderstanding and his cultural biases that were growing suddenly turned into smiles. And all of that frustration and just like this idiot, all disappeared. And the smile came on. And it just reminded me is that sometimes this is why we're doing this, is because there's so much misunderstanding among 2 really nice people. And all of a sudden they hate each other, And so or they're embarrassed, the guy wouldn't even look up. He's so embarrassed and he felt like I'm a second-class citizen because I can't understand what the person's trying to tell me to do. And so that to me is very satisfying. Is when you see the so-and-so second-class citizen feel like, hey, wait a minute, maybe I am important. And somebody finally understands me. So to me, I just wanted to share that. I thought that was really a good reminder.
Thanks, Sue. That was great. Okay, our fifth question, I think most of you went through it already, about the advice for anyone starting a career in medical, legal, or community interpretation. But is there anything else you would like to share for anyone starting the business?
I think my advice would be become the kind of interpreter that you would want to hire if you were going to hire an interpreter. So an interpreter who's prepared, who knows their skills with the modes of interpretation, who is fluent in the terminology, an interpreter who knows their ethics, and I think just be that person, be that professional that you would want to hire if you were hiring an interpreter, whether it's medical, whether it's legal, or community or conference.
Just to add, I would say always go one step beyond what is just absolutely necessary, right? It's like Sue was saying, it's not enough, we've all said it, to learn the translation of, X is Y in another language. Go beyond. Do some research on it. Look at the history of whatever. Look at why. These are the things that will make you remember, right? Because you can memorize words in a glossary, and you're going to forget them in 2 weeks when you're not dealing with that anymore, unless you have broader context. So always keep that going. I would say, besides that, try to keep your skills going. I don't have the opportunity to speak high-level Spanish here with many people, so I listen to audiobooks a lot when I'm running, and I look like a crazy person when I'm running because I'm listening to the audiobook, and trust me, I listen to words where I'm like, ooh, I don't know that word, because these, I'm listening to books from Chile, from Argentina, from Spain, and they're used different words, and I'm like, ooh, that's an interesting word that I don't use. I stop cold, right? I go look it up and take a photo of whatever the word was, and so that I can keep running, right? So I look like a crazy person sometimes running, but that's what I do. And then I have a context, I already saw it in a book, and I still try to build my general vocabulary. I still try to become a better linguist every day. That's it.
That's great. When I started in conference interpreting, especially, I would also be running and listening to economic terminology, and I would listen. Or in the court, when I wanted to take the court test, I'd be running and listen to the A's and the B's and the A, like arraignment, and then the Chinese, and then I would and it would go, and then I tried to say the Chinese before the English came out, and so why not exercise at the same time, right? Because it makes it easier, but it's just using all the time that you had to really improve vocabulary. So that was really a good one. And then the rest of you, I would just say you should find out what kind of programs there are out there. You really need training, and you need good language. So some of you, if you're just learning your language, go live in the country. Get your language great. Get it really, really good, because you really want to start off training by already having your language down. Why go through training when you don't have the language, So I always say you need to be at least a B or better, B or A in a language, which means a near native speaker. You should be a near native speaker in at least a near native speaker, if not a native speaker, in both, at least, both, the two languages that you're learning. So work on language. That's the first thing. You can't go far without it. The second thing is get training. And I think the next session, they're going to talk a little bit about what training is available. I know Chris mentioned something about Des Moines University having some training. There's a lot of training online that you can probably get scholarships for, as well as here in Hawaii. So just start learning. You can take the court 2-day workshop to understand what it's about. And because it said, what advice would you offer individuals looking to start a career? The other thing is to be available. I had people start our program, and we had like 5 people drop out, and they're taking other people's place. So at the KCC, where we started this program last year, we had like 25 seats, and when 5 people drop out, or only 18 make it to the next semester, it's kind of sad, and that just means they didn't really think about their own life situation. They say, oh, it's free, I want to take it. Well, I just adopted a kid, or I'm going to, I'm divorced, or I'm moving, or I'm something. So you want to really think about devoting the time that you have. And after you become trained, then have time and don't be, I mean, if you're working full time, it's hard to get jobs, so you want to build up that thing, but take a day off a week if you have to, and say, hey, I'm available every Thursday or something to get yourself started into this. And if you speak another language that is not very commonly used here in Hawaii, then think about maybe a telephone or video company where you can work online. And so that's what I would say, is go out and look and look and look. And again, the next session we're going to talk more, I think, about how training and what that looks like here in Hawaii. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think, Sue, you have some training online on your website, or no?
I think, Carol, you're going to talk about that next. Yeah, so
Okay.
Carol's going to talk.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions? I will may collect the postcards for questions for any of the speakers. Does anyone have any questions to submit? Raise your hand and we will come around and collect. Is the state of Hawaii implementing a certification program for interpreters, translators?
This is actually a state of Hawaii question,
Yeah.
but I think that there's really no, even though the Office of Language Access, is trying to collect a list of interpreters and things to help agencies know, where to go and where to find things. But I think when it comes to certification, it needs to be an education. It needs to come out of the education, unless it's like you're already educated and then they just somehow administer the test. So, for example, in the court system, the state of Hawaii, has the judiciary, the Office of Equality and Access to the Courts, and we had Debbie, who was in red today, and she's the one who, they came up with a whole kind of system to give testing, because we joined what they call the National Consortium for State Courts. And so it was years in the making. But I don't know, we can ask AP today if there's something in the planning, but I do know that we do have medical interpreting tests coming up, and for those who have completed our program at KCC, and we'll talk about that later. But that's all I know for the state of Hawaii, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Sue. For interpreter
By the
training-
way, there are national exams. And I think that's what I think they're going to say. The national exams are very important. I don't think we should always put weight on, a state. I think what the state might do is recognize those who are nationally certified. So the two medical institutions that offer national certification, what Chris talked about, as well as what Christina talked about. Oh, the two federally certified, state certified. So there are exams you can take, and that's what you need to show the agencies who want to hire you and people who want to hire you. You should be credentialed, but there are a lot of good national boards that are coming up. And then again, our program that focus on the languages that are not nationally, they don't have it yet in the national realm.
I don't want to add anything.
These two questions are similar, but any available scholarships out there that we can apply for the certified programs? And is there any available for the Chuukese language?
Again, that's for you.
Again, next, if it's here in Hawaii, blah, blah, blah. I know that Barbara had some scholarships available for Micronesian people who wanted to become interpreters. And that was some time ago, about 10 years ago, that we started training them. And they are all excellent full-time interpreters, are very good. And now at the KCC program, and Carol, raise your hand. So she's going to be talking about the KCC program, and it's all funded. And then we have what we call an incumbent workers stuff that she's going to be talking about. So if you want to learn more about the program and how to get scholarships, yes, there are scholarships for any language. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. So another question is, how much does an interpreter get paid? Comparing,
enough.
Comparing Hawaii with the U.S. mainland.
Less. And not enough. I mean, what's different? Like, federal is the same, right? So if I work here in federal court, I'll just speak legally. If I work in federal court here, or if I work in Wyoming, or if I work in New York, you make the same. Which isn't even fair, right? Because the cost of living in Wyoming is so much less than it is here, so it makes no sense. We've been working on that for a while, federal interpreters. The state We're working on that too. The interpreters here in the state, legal interpreters, since the whole program was formed, which was in 2007, have not received a raise since 2007. So you do the math. But we're trying. We're trying. We're trying. I hope to get there in the next year. What can I say? Pardon me? It depends on your tier. There are 6 different tiers. So tier 6 gets the highest, and then there are some people who aren't even tiered, right? Tier 1 and below. So it goes by tier.
It's like 25 an hour for tier. So if you're tier 1 and you haven't really taken a test to move up, you get like 25 an hour with a 2-hour minimum in the court. Yeah, whereas if you're, right now, it's at 55 an hour for tier 6, which they are. But we're hoping to change that this coming year.
Yeah,
We're very hopeful.
We're very hopeful. We're trying. It could double if we get what is actually just even an increment by taking into account inflation because of the lack of raise for so many years.
And
you
for
can talk about
medical or community?
I think that it really depends on the agency that you work for, the organization or the healthcare association that you work for, and also your language. And if you speak Marshallese or Chuukese, you might demand a higher rate than, say, Spanish. And also, the first question asked not only about interpretation, but translation. And there's another national association called the American Translators Association, and they do most of the translator certification into English and into other languages, and they have several exams, although not for some of our Pacific Island languages.
Okay, the next question is, what is your view on the artificial intelligence? Do you think AI will take over the position for interpreters and translators?
I love this question because I prepared for it. So, see, I over-prepared and it paid off. So, I just had to find it. So I actually went online and knowing that the question might come up, I said to Bard, Bard is Google's AI tool, and I said, but hey Bard, when will you replace professional translators and interpreters? And Bard answered, I will not replace professional translators and interpreters in the near future. While I am able to translate languages with a high degree of accuracy, I am still not able to capture the nuances of human language, such as cultural context and intent, that are essential for professional translations. These are things that only human translators can do. And I'm going to abridge it a little bit, but it says, however, I'm going to go to the end, don't get too happy, AI will continue to improve, and it is possible that it will eventually be able to replace human translators for some tasks. Some tasks. So we're going to have to deal with it.
Yeah, and I would say for at least medical and legal, there are so many liability issues that would come up using AI. And we hear of some clients, I think, or maybe some attorneys or some clinics that try to use Google Translate. And you've all seen bad Google translations. Mm-hmm. So I've heard that Google's AI or their algorithm for Google Translate's getting better. I haven't seen it yet. I know for medical terminology, I saw a study that 65% of Google Translate's medical translations were incorrect. So I would say for the time being, don't use AI, and hopefully it's the farther out in the future.
Thank you. Okay, this question is, are there tiers for Micronesian languages in the court?
In the
Sue?
court?
Yeah, I'm assuming this
I
is
think
court
whoever asked
because
that
it's
probably knew what he
tiers.
was asking. There are tiers, and there's actually a test for simultaneous only for the courtroom. But the problem is they don't have any graders right now, so it's kind of on hold because they don't have anyone to grade the test. So we are creating something new, but that might be a year or two down the road. Yeah.
Because
But-
language and culture is different, you know,
Yeah.
and going into a situation, there might not be translation for some of the things that the court, right? Am I correct?
Well, then you would have to find an explanation that's equivalent. If there's no word, then you do an explanation.
They have courts in all Micronesian nations. So, they have courts, and I've gone down there with Debbie Tuleng de Silva to train the Micronesian nation interpreters. And so, we're all working on this problem of vocabulary. But yeah, don't worry, that testing is always in the back of our minds, and I'm supposed to be working on a test myself in the last couple months on a Chuukese test. And once that's done, we can move on to Marshallese. So it's going to take time, but it's in the target.
Okay, thank you. This question came from the Office of Health Equity Program Specialist, and they're asking, on the limited state budgets, what advice would you give state government on, I guess, providing language access?
If I may,
Yeah.
raise your budget. You have to raise your budget. You have to budget for more interpreters and translators. And I think it's happening already. It's happening with many, many, many agencies. And the problem is if you wait till, I hate to say this, but the housing or the Department of Human Services or these places that have been, or the Department of Transportation, which have been sued, and the Unemployment Office, which has had a legal lawsuit from the Civil Rights, U.S. Civil Rights Commission, then you're going to do it anyway. It's just that at that time, you got to do a lot more than just raise a budget. So it's a really scary thing to be taken to court because you're not offering what you have to offer. So I would say you have to convince the higher ups, we need money for language access.
I just want to add one very quick, because I know time's up, but in 2020, 35% of the U.S. population was born outside of the country. So just figure that. So to echo what Sue was saying, just need to increase your budget, because that number still is going to keep going up.
Advocate for language access. That's what we got to do. We know what's happening in Maui. Many of us are working on the ground trying to improve language access there. And we knew it happened during the pandemic, but here we are in a disaster situation. And we are looking for any interpreters that can help us in the languages of Chuukese, Marshallese, Pohnpeian, Spanish speaking. So if you know of anybody or if you'd like to participate, come and see me or Tarina Wong sitting at this table to apply for our phone bank and our navigation that we're going to create for Maui in different languages that are needed there right now. So thank you very much.